The Black Archive.
Good evening, and welcome. My name is Frank Callahan, is Voices of War, a place where memories don't fade. They echo. You're listening through The Black Archive, a channel built to preserve the stories that history books often rush past, the human moments buried beneath strategy, politics, and headlines. Here, we don't just talk about wars. We talk about the men who lived them, survived them, and in many cases, never truly left them behind. This podcast is different. There are no loud sound effects, no dramatic recreations trying to turn war into entertainment. What you'll hear instead are reflections, quiet ones, honest ones, sometimes uncomfortable ones, because war, especially for those who've seen it up close, is rarely what people imagine. In this space, I speak not as a historian, not as a narrator reading from a script, but as a veteran, a man who has seen enough to understand that the truth about war isn't found in victories or defeats, but in the moments in between, the waiting, the doubt, the faces you never forget. Each episode of Voices of War will bring you a different story. Sometimes from the Pacific, sometimes from Europe, sometimes from conflicts that never made front-page headlines, but mattered just as much to the men who were there. We'll talk about courage, yes, but also fear. We'll talk about brotherhood, but also loss. And sometimes, we'll talk about the enemy, not as a faceless figure, but as another human being, standing on the other side of the same storm. Tonight, I want to start with something simple. A question. What happens when everything you were told about your enemy turns out to be wrong? Not slightly wrong, completely wrong. Because that is where many wars truly begin to change. You see, before a soldier ever steps onto a battlefield, he already carries a version of the enemy in his mind, a version shaped by training, by propaganda, by the stories he's been told since the day he put on the uniform. Strong, weak, honorable, cowardly. We create these images because they make things easier. Easier to fight, easier to justify, easier to survive. But reality doesn't care about those images. And sooner or later, reality shows up. For many Japanese pilots in the early years of World War II, that moment came high above the Pacific Ocean. In the summer of 1904. Up until then, they believed something with absolute certainty. They believed they were superior, not just better trained, not just flying better aircraft, but fundamentally superior as warriors. They had been told that American pilots were soft, undisciplined, too comfortable, too attached to life to truly fight. Men who would panic under pressure, men who would break. And in those early months of the war, it seemed like all of that was true. Japanese aircraft dominated the skies. Their pilots were experienced, precise, fearless. They outmaneuvered American planes, outclimbed them, outturned them. Victory came quickly, and often. And when victory comes easily, it does something dangerous to a man. It convinces him that what he believes must be true. Came Guadalcanal. Now, if you've studied the war, you know Guadalcanal was more than just a battle. It was a turning point. The kind of place where confidence meets resistance, and certainty begins to crack. For the first time, Japanese pilots found themselves facing something they didn't expect. American pilots who didn't run. American pilots who adapted. American pilots who fought differently. There's a story, one that stayed with me over the years. It's about a Japanese pilot, experienced, skilled, the kind of man who had survived countless dogfights. He spotted an American fighter, got behind it, lined up his shot. It should have been routine. But before he could pull the trigger, Another American plane came in from the side. He broke off, tried again, same thing. Every time he moved in, another aircraft was there, protecting, covering, working. Together, that was something new, something unfamiliar, because where he came from, combat was personal. Individual skill mattered most. But up there, in that sky, he wasn't facing individuals. He was facing a team. And that changed everything. You have to understand, war isn't just about machines, it's about systems, about how people think, how they adapt, how they learn. The Americans, they learned fast, they studied every encounter, every mistake, every loss, and then they adjusted. They developed tactics, simple ones, but effective. Fight in pairs. Protect your wingman. Don't turn with the enemy. Strike, and climb away. It wasn't about proving who was the better pilot. It was about surviving, and winning. And slowly, fight by fight, something began to shift. Japanese pilots, the same men who once believed the war would be easy, started to realize they were facing an enemy who was changing, improving, getting stronger. And that realization, it doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in moments, in small doubts, in the split second where you hesitate, because something doesn't feel the way it used to. There was another pilot, Saburo Sakai, a name some of you might recognize. He was one of the best, disciplined, experienced, respected, the kind of man who believed deeply in everything he had been taught. And one day, during a mission over Guadalcanal, he made a mistake. He thought he was approaching enemy fighters. Turned out, they were dive bombers. And those bombers, they were ready. Gunfire tore through his aircraft, hit him in the head, blinded him in one eye, paralyzed part of his body. At that point, most men don't come back. But he did. Flew for hours, wounded, barely conscious, navigating by instinct more than sight, made it back, landed, and then, before accepting medical help, he gave his report. That kind of discipline, that kind of will, it tells you something. Not just about him, but about the kind of war this was. Because, here's the thing, after experiences like that, after facing an enemy who fights back harder than expected, something inside a soldier changes. You stop underestimating, you stop believing the easy stories. You start respecting what's in front of you, and that's what happened, not overnight, not all at once, but gradually. Undeniably, Japanese pilots began to understand that the Americans they had dismissed were not weak. They were resilient, they were adaptable, and most importantly, they were determined. And determination. That's a dangerous thing in war, because it doesn't fade, it grows. Every fight, every loss, every narrow escape, it builds something inside a man. And when both sides have that, that's when wars become long, brutal, unforgiving. You see, when I think about these stories, I don't just see aircraft, or tactics, or battle maps. I see young men. Men in their 20s, sometimes younger, far from home, carrying beliefs that were handed to them, and then watching those beliefs fall apart in real time. That's not easy. It forces you to confront something most people never have to face. The idea that you might have been wrong, not just about the enemy, but about the war itself. And that realization, it stays with you long after the fighting ends, long after the uniforms are put away, because war doesn't just shape history, it shapes the people who survive it. And sometimes, the most important thing they carry back isn't victory, it's understanding. Understanding that the man on the other side was just as real as you were, just as afraid, just as determined. To make it home, that's something you don't hear often enough. But it matters, because If we're going to remember these wars, if we're going to tell these stories, we should tell them honestly, not as legends, not as myths, but as experiences, human ones, and that is what this podcast is about. In the episodes ahead, we're going to explore more of these moments where perception meets reality, where strategy meets survival, where belief meets truth. Some stories will be intense, some will be quiet, but all of them will be real. So, if you're still here, listening, I appreciate that, truly, because taking the time to understand these stories means something. It means we're not just remembering the war, we're learning from it. This has been Frank Callahan, and you've been listening to Voices of War on the Black Archive. I'll see you in the next one.